Hey, Alexa, define mythology.
Mythology. A collection of myths, especially those belonging to particular religious or cultural traditions.
Oh, you mean like the mighty Thor and the Norse pantheon of gods like Odin, Loki, and Hela. Or perhaps you mean Greek gods like Zeus, Poseidon, and Athena.
Also, consider modern mythologies like those found in comic books.
You know, that's an interesting point. Consider Marvel Comics. The creators at Marvel have constructed a rich history that has traversed multiple genres, including comedy, romance, horror, western, science fiction, and of course, superheroes. And at the core of those stories, you'll find an interesting cast of characters responsible for safeguarding humanity as they transcend into the golden age of superheroics. Now, don't tell me you've never heard of the Eternals. Come on, Athena, Circe, Icarus. They are essentially the building blocks of Marvel Universe in its entirety. I can tell you don't believe me. Then stay tuned, because in this episode, we're going to go on an epic adventure in order to explore myths, gods, celestials, the universe, a brand new McDonald's Happy Meal, and the greatest comic book creator that ever lived. Period. If this is your first time checking us out, do us a huge favor and click that like button, and why not supersize your experience by subscribing to Retro Spectrum. During the first half of the 20th century, pulp magazines and comic books were becoming really popular. There was one particular creator who seemed to dazzle collectors throughout his long career. Let's take a moment to talk about the king. No, not Elvis. Definitely not. I'm talking about Jack the King Kirby.
The comic book medium itself is special. From what I understand, the editorial comic was first. And then they added a few panels to that and you had a comic strip. And they added a few pages to that and you had a comic book. And what we can add to the comic book? We may have to think about that.
After World War II, Kirby took work at a number of different publishers, illustrating Western and romance comic books. In the 1950s, Kirby took work at an earlier incarnation of Marvel known as Atlas Comics, followed by a brief affair with DC Comic Books, experimenting with ideas and developing concepts like the Challengers of the Unknown. By the time he returned to Marvel, horror and science fiction comics were all the rage. He'd co-create monsters like Fin Fang Foom and Groot, the Thing from Outer Space. The science fiction genre continued to grow in popularity during the 1960s. America's interest in space travel created a sense of curiosity about the larger universe. Jack Kirby's style seemed to paint a clearer picture of what might lie beyond Earth, at least in our imagination. For example, scientist Reed Richard took his companions Ben Grimm, Susan Storm, and her brother Johnny into outer space in order to study cosmic rays. The effects of that trip gave us the world's greatest comic magazine. The Fantastic Four was written by Stanley and art by the legendary Jack Kirby.
Stay tuned for some scenes of next week's exciting show.
In 1962, Kirby would work with Stanley in order to bring us a new take on the Norse god of thunder. This time, they'd take the characters and legends of Norse mythology and place them in outer space. Space gods, essentially. It was a concept that would continue throughout Kirby's career as a comic book creator.
Cross the rainbow bridge of Asgard, where the booming heavens roar. You behold in breathless wonder the god of thunder, mighty Thor.
Of course, science fiction wasn't just limited to comic books and graphic novels.
From the world of tomorrow comes a thrilling new television series, Lost in Space.
Television shows like Lost in Space and Star Trek gave us something new to watch. Filmmaker Stanley Kubrick sent moviegoers into the far-off year of 2001. And recently, we experienced this incredible piece of cinema in a special exhibit at the Museum of Moving Image in Astoria, New York.
In the first year of the 21st century, there is strange and wondrous beauty, startling experiences that jolt and mystify, and the danger of complete obliteration.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
2001: A Space Odyssey had a tremendous impact on the cinema. Its music and visuals are iconic. While we were still a number of years away from the first McDonald's Happy Meal, Howard Johnson would create a pretty nifty cross-promotion with 2001. Kids could receive a pretty far-out children's menu, which came complete with a comic book illustrating several of the scenes from the film.
Howard Johnson's next stop.
Now, I can't say that Kubrick's take on the Space Odyssey had a particularly strong impact on Kirby's comic book style, but it's easy to see some of the similarities between the two. In the 70s, Kirby departed Marvel in order to construct his fourth world epic at DC Comics. He gave us Mr. Miracle, the Forever People, and new gods like Orion, Highfather, and the ruler of the planet Apocalypse, Darkseid. Jack Kirby was able to take religious themes and infuse them into a very extraterrestrial tale. Now, unfortunately, creative differences caused Kirby to leave DC, but he did return to Marvel, and this is where the real fun begins. One of the first projects Jack Kirby would take on upon his return to Marvel was an adaptation and subsequent expansion of 2001: A Space Odyssey in comic book form. While Kirby's style was perfect for the project, he had little interest in rehashing someone else's story, so instead, he expanded on the story. That's not to say that Kubrick's film had zero impact on the project. The King would study stacks of film stills and explore the original novelization by Arthur C. Clarke. Some of the illustrations were easily recognizable by film enthusiasts, but Kirby went beyond the original film, adding text, dialogue, and adding to the overall narrative. The other story Kirby would create for Marvel was completely original, straight out of the mind of Kirby. You see, it turns out that life across Marvel Universe owes a great deal of gratitude to large, powerful beings known as the Celestials. You know, more space gods, essentially. The Celestials visit mankind during its infancy in what would be known as the First Host. Their purpose was to help encourage the development and evolution of man. In that way, they were very similar to the monoliths from 2001. The Celestials broke up mankind into essentially three subspecies. The first and most obvious is Homo sapien. In each of us, they'd impart some kind of an X gene into our DNA. That's why characters like Bruce Banner can turn into the Hulk instead of, well, dying from gamma radiation. It's also the reason why Homo sapiens can evolve into mutants, like in the X-Men comic books. Oh, and by the way, Jack Kirby is largely responsible for creating all those characters I just listed. Another one of those subspecies was the Deviants, disfigured mutations often working against mankind as well as the Eternals. As you've probably figured out, the Eternals are that third subspecies, and there are several amazing members of this group, each with incredible power. They were tasked by the Celestials in safeguarding humanity from the Deviants. Their war with the Deviants would carry on for centuries, and during that time, mankind would often confuse the Eternals with other deities. Athena was often mistaken for Athena, Makari was often mistaken for Mercury, Zuras was mistaken for Zeus, and built his home in the city of Olympia. As a comic book collector, I've always been a fan of the Eternals. I was extremely excited to see the franchise revitalized by writer Neil Gaiman in 2006, and never would I have imagined that they'd appear on film, let alone in a McDonald's Happy Meal. And this is the Happy Meal box, and first and foremost, I gotta get it out of the way. Selma Hayek on a Happy Meal box. I've had a huge crush on her ever since Desperado, and it's just cool to see. The box, so many characters that it actually fills in 2 sides of the box. That's how many characters are in this movie, which is outrageous. If we flip over to the other side of the box, you're going to see there's actually something that works with the Happy Meal app that'll allow your Eternal characters to light up. On top of the box, there are 10 Eternal characters in all, 10 to collect in this set, with so many characters, and I really love all of these characters. I can't wait to see which character I got in my Happy Meal, which character I received in my Happy Meal. So let's check it out. And it looks like we have toy number 1. It is Icarus. Icarus is one of the most popular members of the Eternals. He has a variety of powers, but he'll typically stick to super strength, energy manipulation, and of course, flight. Because his name is Icarus after all. All right, everybody, let's check out my new toy. Here is an overall look at Icarus. You can see on the bottom is where the light will shine through when you use the app, which is pretty nifty.
Meet Icarus. Officially, he's the tactical leader of the Eternals, so he makes our big plans. Unofficially, the guy loves puppies and Cersei. Icarus is super strong. He can fly and make blast beams of cosmic energy from his eyes. Go on, activate his powers. Pretty cool, right? Yeah, he's been doing that for centuries. And just like that, Icarus and his powerful eyeballs are off to battle the deviants.
And then on the back, a little button that makes him fight. We're going to go with strength as his power for this one because flight would be too expensive for this toy and laser eyes would be far too dangerous. All right, let's check out what's in my second Happy Meal. It looks like it's number 3, and that is... Oh, it's Kingo. Kingo Sunan was introduced in issue 11 of the Eternals series. In this comic book, he appears as Japanese in descent, but in the film, he'll appear to originate from India. So that'll be a fun little departure from the source material. The character fought the Mongol Empire in the 13th century and learned the ways of the samurai during the 16th century. With such a rich history, it'll be interesting to see how he changes for the film. Now, in the comic book, he very rarely uses energy manipulation, but it looks like for this toy and in the movie, that's going to change a little bit. But one of the interesting things that can happen with these toys is you can actually snap them together and make a whole set. This includes all of the Marvel figures from throughout the different series. I think this is like series 3 of these Marvel figurines that have been showing up in Happy Meals, and you can just snap them all together. Now, I hope you enjoyed experiencing the all-new McDonald's Happy Meal featuring characters from the Eternals. Now, we'd like to hear from you. What is your favorite Jack Kirby creation? Is it the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, the New Gods, or even the Eternals? Also, are you excited to see the Eternals film? Go ahead and tell us all your thoughts in the comments section below. Oh, and before you go, if you enjoyed this video, do us a huge favor and drop a like and consider subscribing to Retro Spectrum so you don't miss a single episode of McDonald's Unboxed.